Hello everybody, welcome to session 2. The theme for this particular session is educational assessment and evaluation, and that includes authenticity and assessment that incorporates academic integrity such as reducing plagiarism or contract cheating, social innovation in assessment design, embedding clinical practice or work integrated learning into assessment, innovative techniques to ensure student success, quality of content and curriculum design, digital badging and micro-credentials and/or attrition and retention. So quite a lot that we were trying to shove into this one particular theme. Everyone, there are 4 presentations for this, this session. So what I'll do now is I will move straight in, and we'll start the first presentation. Is Alexandra here? So Alexandra, this is the presentation on meeting the professionals, connecting the workplace assessment and lifelong learning. Alexandra, over to you.
Hello everyone, thank you Celeste for the introduction. Just
all right.
This is a virtual setup. I thought I nevertheless acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm calling in. It's Noongar. I'm in Perth, Western Australia, and I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners, their customs, beliefs, languages, and pay my respect to their past elders, past and present, as well as emerging. Just to set the context, meeting the professionals is an idea that I came up with for our Master in Translation Studies course. We have a lot of students that are aspiring translators and interpreters, and in the past I've always called in on guest speakers to come in and present and talk about the profession changes in technology, how they're adapting to the workplace. Because we are in Perth, it's a very limited pool of people that I can actually draw on. So it's become a bit of an imposition, and I thought, why don't I record those wonderful volunteers whenever they come in? We've got a very professional one-button studio, a good setup, and I ensure that we've got a record both for the participants so they can upload those little videos on their home pages, wherever they are advertising their services, and use them for our students. The students would have to watch them, write quiz questions, and it is part of the assessment that students design and that their fellow students have to work with. So I applied for grant money, I got it. All of my colleagues obviously thought this was a really good idea to make sure that students and the professions are in communication, that we are learning from one another, we understand the expectations of the workplace. And yeah, to everyone's surprise, the project didn't go so well, and I would like to talk about one of the big issues that I've got with this particular setup. So just to set the context, initially the goal was to have 10 interviews with professionals, to integrate it in a very dynamic way in the student assessment. Wherever I felt videos needed to be edited, shortened, I certainly did this. I worked with pop-up questions as well, and just made sure this was fully integrated into our assessment processes. The project seemed to go so well that soon 10 interviews became 20 interviews, largely unscripted. Everyone had different issues, different experiences to talk to, and a very diverse set of professionals were certainly coming to the fore and introduced to the students this way. I also branched out. My language is German, or my language pair is German-English, but I made sure we heard from translators working in Mandarin, Japanese, from interpreters into 7 different languages in the end, as well as translators of literary texts and people who traveled with political delegations, for example. So a great variety. In my slides, I've got a video, so unfortunately I won't be able to share this with you now. I'll just skip past. So as I said, students worked with those videos in a trial in first semester of this year. They were asked to write quiz questions. Students then had to do those quizzes in class. They were part of the assessment, and the recordings were growing and growing, so 10 interviews became 20 interviews very quickly. So I thought I really had gone out and made sure that the world of work was coming to the students in one way or another. In the end, I also had Skype interviews, Zoom sessions with colleagues overseas. So screen captures in this PowerPoint slide will show you this at a later stage. The student feedback, however, that I received at the end of the semester was pretty disastrous. They were my worst ever student unit reflection feedback surveys that I've received back. We've got a score out of 4, and I was hovering around 2.5 and 2.7. 4 is the perfect score, and I am not used to anything below 3.5 usually. And just to read out 2 quotes from the students who felt obviously very strongly about this assessment was that, I quote, "There were quizzes for the videos, but the videos were somewhat useless. It would have been much better to have brought all these translators and interpreters into class physically and allowed students to network with them." So clearly the students felt they were missing out on the opportunity to do networking. Another student said, "In the future, I would highly recommend this class stop using videos for assessment tasks and force students to practice more types of translation while introducing them to the different literary periods. So homework should be prioritized, not 5% quizzes." So both the format as well as the assessment were rejected. So I've started a bit of soul searching since then, particularly since the feedback from my colleagues. I applied for a senior teaching fellowship in that period, has been enthusiastic. Everyone had heard about the grant and had heard about the project, thought this was the way to go to provide flexible education, to have a bank of lifelong learning interviews that students could get back to, etc. So in a way, after receiving the student feedback, I felt I was back at square one and very much in a position where I'd been a few years ago when I trialed very enthusiastically simulations and video role plays, where again and the publication that came out of it was entitled "What Educators Think and Students Want, Virtually Worlds Apart." So there seemed to be this clear disconnect between my colleagues and myself who thought, yes, theoretically, pedagogically, this sounds like a really useful addition to our face-to-face teaching, and the students who rebelled at it in the case of the video simulation, rejecting the idea that they had to learn computing or that they had to do editing, and in this particular instance where they rather would have done traditional translation exercises and had, albeit more limited, opportunities for networking. So my question more or less for you, and this is where my presentation ends, is that I am wondering, could I have done this differently and better without going through ethical approval for students to meet translators, without running the risk of sending students out with a video camera interviewing translators and putting them into the driver's seat. So I might just open up for discussion and see whether you can shed any light on my experience and where I've obviously gone so wrong. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Yeah, that's really interesting and very brave of you, I have to say, to share experiences that haven't gone well. You know, normally we like to showcase things that have gone well, but there's some learning in there, I think, for all of us. So what I might do is, if anyone does have a question, you can either raise your hand in the participant chat, or you can type a question into the group chat, or there's 28 of us in the room, so if someone does want to unmute and speak, I think we should be okay as long as we're not all unmuting at once. Does anyone have a question for Alexandra? Yes, Adam.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. That was really interesting. So I don't know if it's more a question or just encouragement about the fact that the videos might be terrific, and it might be, perhaps the disconnect is about the way it's used as an assessment piece. And I would encourage you to keep exploring ways to use a set of resources that to you and your colleagues sound like they're terrific and they've got such value. But I wonder how much of the students' discontent was, I was forced to engage in these, and they want some face-to-face. So maybe blending a little bit of face-to-face time with, and then saying we can get 20 more of these in the virtual sense and explore those. But I hope you don't give up on what is probably a really terrific source. To encourage you to keep thinking about ways to make use of it.
Just wonder what the experience is of any of you when something is not for assessment. Do students actually do it? So how much reading, how much viewing outside of class do they actually do? I thought if I integrate it into the assessment, even if it's just at 5% pieces, the chances of them being visited is much greater. And I certainly also wanted for the interviewers that had taken the time to see that on YouTube their clicks are going up and they had an audience. So.
I'm Sarah. I'm in the same room as Adam. I have a follow-up question as well. Did you run this for only one semester so far, or have you consistently received this feedback?
No, this was the first time. I only got the grant at the beginning of the year. Then it was probably a little bit rushed to, as soon as the videos were edited and produced, I uploaded them, made them available, and integrated them into the assessment. So yeah, the students realized it was a project on the hop.
We had a course here where it was converted into a blended learning model, and in the very first semester that happened, there were a number of students who were saying, bring back the old workbook, we don't want to do this online thing, and then come in having, because we expected them to have watched the video and then come in to do something in the actual lecture time. They didn't like that, or some of them didn't like that. And since then, though, it's gone great. So it was just that one transitional semester. It might be some sort of like a word of mouth for what they expect out of the course. So I don't know. I mean, like if you have many semesters of this feedback, then that's definitely something to worry about. But I don't know if it's as much of a worry if it's only on the first go at it. Maybe there's not enough student buy-in to the idea yet, but.
Yeah.
It could be a question of balance. What if the students, you get them through the assessment to engage with one or two of the videos and then let them know there's 18 more there if you found that interesting.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, use them as a taster. Yeah, thank you both, Adam and Sarah, much appreciated.
And actually that was very similar to a question that I had for you, Alexandra, was the nature of the cohort themselves. And were they a distance, like an online only cohort, or was this a new way of learning for them?
Yes, that's right. No, it's a face-to-face master's course in the Translation Studies module. Very diverse range of student abilities, I have to say. So some of them will certainly qualify one day to become interpreters. Others still struggle a lot with both their target language and translation practice. So, you know, maybe persevering and also introducing the blended elements more scaffolded is probably a good idea. Yeah. Thanks, Celeste.
Yeah, I think it's encouraging to see how it progresses. Be really interesting to see some follow-ups. I encourage you to keep going.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions for Alexandra? Any comments? If not, we are running into time. Oh, sorry. Yes, I can't see who that is.
Ziad.
Hello.
Hello. I joined from the beginning, but I was like unseen. Can you see me, Celeste?
I can see you, Ziad, yes.
How are you? It's always good, as was said, like people used to present their success stories, but you are about to close the door about something that might not work if someone wanted to try it. But my question is about, because you are based in Perth, do you think because the number of students affecting the survey results, and if it was done with like a big pool, then could be some diverse feedback?
Yeah, it only attracted 7 students in this particular unit, so very small. And as soon as we've got 6 students providing feedback, the results are released. So that only 5 responded negatively, I would live in blissful ignorance. So yes, 2 very vocal students in such a small cohort can certainly mean that if students agreed with other aspects of the course, 2 strongly disagreed, pull the mark down significantly. Yes, no, it was certainly a shock to the system to see 2.5 and 2.7 there.
Yeah, I'm not very sure because number of students actually works like has a big impact in the like when you provide new techniques, because like a smaller group thinks that face-to-face more fruitful in order to communicate with the teacher. But when it's like really big crowd, I think the results will be different, maybe.
well, you're encouraging. I might dare to persevere, and if I'm back here next year and tell another non-successful story, we might revise. Thank you for your time.
That would be great to come back again and tell us it didn't work. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Any final questions? We've got 1 minute left in this time slot. Anything else for Alexandra? All right, well, Alexandra, I hope you hang around anyway, and we might have some time to revisit. Thank you very much. So can I ask everyone to thank Alexandra?
Thank you for your feedback. Much appreciated. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, we'll move to the next presentation, which is to get the best from your students, allow them to be creative, which is Adam and Sarah. So over to you guys.
So hello everyone, I'm Adam.
And I'm Sarah.
Sarah and I co-coordinate and co-teach a course called Science 1000.
We're at UQ in Brisbane. This course is actually a compulsory course for all of the Bachelor of Science students at UQ. And we want to talk about an assessment piece which involves creativity and authentic assessment.
Right. And so there are a couple of different ideas out there about what authentic assessment is, and I think we're going to hear about some of those in the next talk as well. But these quotes from Grant Wiggins sort of speak to the way we're interpreting authentic assessment in the project we're going to talk about here. Tasks are either replicas of or analogous to the kinds of problems faced by adult citizens and consumers or professionals in the field, and that they must anchor the assessment process. Students must see what adults really do with their knowledge. The word adult is arising here because Wiggins is speaking about school students and this sort of idea. But trying to get students to demonstrate craftsmanship and tolerance for ambiguity and things that can't be tested by simplistic test items.
So yeah, last year in 2018, semester 2, we installed a new assignment into the course. The course teaches them how to communicate in science, how to do computer programming in the language Python, and also lots of scientific modeling. So they use Maths B level mathematics, but there's a lot of quantitative skill involved as well. So we decided that the Python component of the course was not being graded, not being assessed properly. It was being assessed in a very dry manner, in sort of like these ad hoc, here interpret what this program would do.
Yeah. The exams didn't seem like a great way to assess Python skills, but also the course was bringing Python programming to scientists because scientists use it, but at the same time as they use programming, they're using their modeling skills and their communicating skills, and so we saw this as an opportunity to put all the skills that students are picking up together with the program to show them the utility of the program.
So we pitched this assessment to them as a task that Public Museum here in Brisbane is asking them to write computer programming for an exhibit. And so this is going to be interacted with patrons of all ages, and we give them categories of rookie, seasoned, or grizzled, depending on, so the patron themselves will pick which category they want to call themselves.
And this is where the creativity comes in, because we know that something that brings the creativity out of our students is to get them imagining speaking to a younger version of themselves, or to what they think is they need to imagine the audience and write for the audience, and somehow this makes them feel creative.
But they also have to read some information that we provide them about echolocation. So they have to start to think about, how does sound travel underwater? And what are the things that would affect that, like salinity and temperature and depth? And so we give them on their sheet, on their assignment sheet, we give them some information about this, but it's actually up to them to then build the models, the mathematical models. So we may say something like salinity, it takes this value at the equator and this value at the pole and changes linearly between, make that assumption. And then they have to just work out, okay, what is the model? And then actually write the program that calculates that.
And although that's, to Sarah and I, that seems highly prescribed, because we've asked for a linear function and we've told you two values. that the function takes a different input. So in fact, we've prescribed a model to students because the model's presented to them in words and they have to interpret it and make it a formula. They feel quite creative doing that.
And then more so, they feel creative taking their mathematical formula that they've written on the page and actually working out how to get their computer program to take inputs and give outputs according to that formula. And with this model, the model gets a little bit more complicated when you also talk about temperature at depth, because that sort of has different rules for different depths. But then overall, they still have to think about, even if you've calculated salinity, even if you've calculated what the temperature is, and you want to then tell the user who's coming to the museum something about salinity and temperature, is this user a rookie? What language should I use? Should I have rounded my decimals? Should I have used units? What way do I use units? Do I say things like part per thousand to a rookie?
So it's decision making. We hope the students recognise that we're letting them make decisions. We're judging those decisions, but it's in that decision making that they are being creative and starting to build on their understanding of how to do things and turn that into something that's a complete task. So the authentic nature of the task, the fact that it combines modelling with programming with communication, and with a little bit of imagination about how to speak to young people or people who are like themselves as well. That's what makes it authentic, is bringing it all together, because we don't do those tasks in isolation usually, and that we're hope the students would recognise when they're finished that the struggles along the way allowed them to be creative and build something that was distinctive. Yeah.
And we are clear with the students that we're really marking on in a holistic way with the rubric that we give them, and it is called the Python and Communication assignment, so that we're not just looking for, can somebody code, we're also looking at holistically how they've communicated the entire project to the museum.
Yeah.
So we're happy to take questions about that, but let's first, before we do, the rest of our presentation is sort of the assessment, like what happened with the assignment. So we have some quantitative results and a little bit of qualitative feedback as well. So some evidence of success we saw is we have been surveying our students on their attitudes to and perceptions of various topics. One of those topics being computer programming before and after the course. So that's week 1 and week 13. So mean OAP just means mean overall attitude to and perceptions of a particular thing.
Yeah. So essentially we asked them 12 questions, like how good are you at computer programming was one of the questions, and the students gave a score between 1 and 7, with 7 being
the
best. And
1 being the worst.
And so we saw the mean OAP changed, and then we applied Cohen's D effect size, and this is considered a medium effect. So something happened.
Yeah. And something really happened in the computer programming side of things more than it did in the maths and science areas. Because if you look at those matched students for which we're talking about that change from a 4.09 average to a 4.82, if you break down by questions, so there were 12 questions on science and 12 questions on maths and 12 questions on computer programming, all of the same nature, but the words science and maths and computer programming swapped out. You can see that the overall biggest change happened in computer programming. We did expect that this was because of this assessment task that we had set, and so we had surveyed our students to find out, and indeed they reported. So the bottom there has this prior computing. 69 of the students who had prior computing, we matched before and after. Of them, 62% of them said that the Python and communication assignment had a positive impact on their perceptions of computer programming.
And 28% said it didn't fuss them either way, and only 10% said an assignment that seemed to take a lot of time had a negative impact on their feelings about, or their attitudes to and perceptions of computer programming.
But also interestingly is that even though we couldn't measure change in the mean for students with no prior computing, because we didn't ask them what their perceptions were if they had no prior computing, even for those students, at the end of the course, when we ask them what components of the course may have changed your perceptions positively or no change or negatively, 62% of those also said positive change from this Python and communication assignment. Now, this is not the only positive thing that they're noting. The tutorials, those workshops that they go to every week, they're very interactive. We do our best to also have those be hands-on experiences. You may be wondering why the numbers are a little bit lower for something called My Pi Tutor. That's an optional thing that they can go online and get some. Because it's optional, we think that a lot of the people in the no change category may have actually not used the resource.
And same for the Python contacts and interactive lecture, and we suspect that what we're seeing there is a lot of people didn't go or didn't watch it.
So that's some of the quantitative data, and then we also had students reflecting on the situation, the effect, the action, and the learning that they used in order to develop an employable skill throughout the course. And a lot of students—
10 minutes, guys, just letting you know.
Yeah.
10 minutes.
A lot of students chose to reflect on this Python and communication assignment, and here's one such reflection.
Yeah. So of course, this reflection is wonderful in many ways. There's some things about it that we don't like, and we certainly saw some reflections that weren't as interesting as this one. But what's wonderful about this is I think we see the power of authentic assessment. For example, in the learning that the students reporting, I am more open to ambiguous problems with specific solutions. We're not quite sure what the specific solutions mean, but I'm guessing maybe quantitative solutions there. And I understand how truly rewarding solving the problem can be. What an amazing thing for a student to reflect on about an assignment. And anecdotally, a few students made remarks about this assignment, and Sarah and I think, even though the student didn't mention it, that the student's ability to connect with the assignment has something to do with the fact that we let them be creative. Some of the students do really interesting things with the communication, particularly to the rookie category.
Yeah, so we give them an overall flow chart, but otherwise we really do let them make choices. And when they ask us, should we do this or that, we say, actually, this is for you to decide. And some of them are uncomfortable with that as an answer, but then they realize that, yep, I can make these decisions myself. And they come up with some pretty cool results. I think that's... Yeah,
so that's what we wanted to say, and we'll be happy to take questions or hear your thoughts on what Sarah and I think is what's leading to success, which is letting students choose some stuff.
Thank you very much, Adam and Sarah. We're sitting at 12 minutes, so we've got a few minutes for questions. Can I don't mind kicking off. If anyone does have a question, either raise your hand in the participants tab or type it into the group chat. But can I ask, what was the previous assessment to this one? And a kind of related question to that is are you trying to encourage them to work online, or are you encouraging them that hybrid? Is that your distinct pedagogy there? And what was the previous assessment?
So they used to do some of the programming in their tutorials, but whether or not they were really good at that was sort of irrelevant to their mark in the tutorial. It was just staying on task and participating. And so the main way in which they were being assessed for their Python programming was just in written exam questions, where they would be given a piece of text, which was code, and then the question would say, a user inputted 4, give every bit of output that would happen, or explain what this line of code is doing, or something like that. So it would just be one question on the exam, so not a huge part of it.
In fact, quite a few students were obviously making the choice to not bother learning the Python programming and just give up on that portion of the exam.
Some of the feedback even said, like, well, why are we working so hard to learn how to code and then never using it?
Yeah, and so we definitely needed an assessment on this. I'm not sure what the second part of your question meant about getting the students to work in an online mode.
No, it's just more of a cohort question, really. How do you teach your students? Are they an online cohort or are they face-to-face?
Well, they have the face-to-face option, all of them. We have enough seats in the classroom for all the students, but the reality is the attendance is poor.
Attendance trickles after a while.
And so many of our students are choosing to be online for the lectures, but they are physically in the room for the workshops or the tutorials. So that's when that's when the students are really getting face-to-face attention.
There's a question that's been posted into the chat. How did the two groups of students perform? That is, were the computing students more able to achieve better outcomes in coding, or was there no difference between the two groups?
So this, we got ethics approval to do this survey, but it's totally unidentified. So we don't know who those students are.
And so, well, there is something that we can talk about. We asked students to estimate their grades, but we couldn't use their real grades. We decided not to dig into the grades they actually earned. We just asked them to anticipate their grades. So we've got that, and it's definitely the case that students students with prior computing were a little more confident about their grades, but it's not clear to me that their grades were actually that much better.
And also their estimated grades were not entirely accurate to the time.
Students'
the grade distribution that actually happened.
The estimated grades in week 1 were very, very high. And in week 13, they were not as high, but they were higher than what was actually the case. And so much of the course is not computer programming, and so when we try to set up the assignment so that you only use the coding that we talked about in the course, but I think the reality is students with coding experience felt more confident.
Thanks, Adam and Sarah. Just one last question from me. Are you going to keep the similar type of assessment into the future? Are you confident with it? Or are you going to try and change it in some way?
Well, we've been running it for now 3 semesters, and so far we tweak it minorly each time. We do really like what it's doing and what it seems to continue to do.
Yeah, that reflection that you saw where the student talked about learning problem solving and putting it together, that's a strong theme in the feedback, and so we would like to keep doing that. The realities of needing to change the assessment to avoid academic misconduct and so on will catch up with us at some stage. But having a large project which puts the skills from the course all together in one place, some sort of authentic assessment, I think is working really well.
Thank you. We do have to finish the session. Just two comments just quickly. Do you know, if this is a first year unit, do you know how the units have progressed in second year and then onwards after doing this particular assessment? And also there was a comment from Ashley in relation to a definition from you of creativity as opposed to including as well as authenticity.
We don't have the data on the students who now be in second year, although I guess there was only 1 semester of those that exist right now, the ones who took it first.
We've got some focus groups running this semester, but the students who took the first version of this assignment was only semester 2 last year, so we've got some focus. That data's coming in, we don't know much about it.
Great, so that means we can see it in the future then.
We'd like to understand it, and we'll share it if we can understand it. And as for creativity, well, the creativity just comes from letting students write for different audiences, and they're making decisions, small decisions about how to do things. But when you put them all together, the students really feel like they own the outcome.
Yeah, and they make decisions that are very interesting that we wouldn't have expected. So often the students who have had no computing experience will have these beautiful stories for the rookie user, and you just wouldn't have thought that they were going to go that way.
Maybe the secret is the marking criteria doesn't say, did you say it this way? Did you do that? Did you, we don't even say, did you round appropriately?
No, it'll say things like the communication is appropriate and fluent for each target audience, and the program is very likely to achieve its purpose, and those sorts of things.
So the creativity comes from letting students choose, and it's different for different students. But sometimes it's the students tell us stories, and we like that.
All right, thank you very much. We'll stop it there. So can I ask everybody to show your appreciation to Adam and Sarah, please?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll jump straight into the next presentation while those guys are closing their screen. Many birds with one stone, an authentic model for group-based assessments. Samer.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Good afternoon. So I'm here today to share my experience with regard to group-based assessments. 2 years ago, I was given the leadership of a research proposal unit, like you can say it is a research methods unit, where students had to do 2 different assessments on an individual basis. But because the student numbers were expected to grow and grow, and there was a need to change the assessments to be group-based assessments from a commercial aspect. So I started to look at previous literature on how we can come up with an authentic assessment for a group assignments, and how can we engage students in a way that they can all engage and be stimulated during the entire journey. So I'll take you through the journey that I have been involved in the last 1 year. So this presentation is a bit different. So if you don't mind, I would like you to connect to my slides, and you can grab your phone, or you can open a new tab in your browser where you can go to menti.com. Just open any tab in your browser and go to menti.com. Then you can use the code 24330. If you are done with that, you can show me thumb up on the screen itself. You will see on the right bottom corner, you will see a thumb button. So you just click on that so we know that you are connected. So menti.com 24330. So you can click on this button if you are connected. So we got 1, that's good. 2. It is still on the bar. Yes, excellent. So a couple more, because I'll get some questions to kick off this presentation, and then we go from there. Okay, we got 8 so far. I think we have 28 in this room, so I wish if everyone can participate. I promise you it will be fun and it will be interactive. You will like it. Okay, I'll get you the first question then, while others are being connected. So the question is, how often do you use group-based assessments? So you'll see us on your screen, in your mobile phone, you will see the question popping up. Always or quite often, sometimes, rarely, not at all. Okay, cool. So it's a bit tricky because many of you may not be interested in my presentation today, but you can use it as, like, you know, general knowledge. So I can see around maybe 50 or 60% who have used it, or they are being using it. So okay, next question then for the entire group. So in a few words, name 3 problems with group assessments. Whatever you think about, you know, your challenges that you have been facing while you conduct group-based assessment, whether in terms of development of the assessment, whether in terms of running of the assessment, or the entire journey of the students. What do you think? What are the key problems that you have been facing? Team selection, grading, freebooters. I don't know what that means. So we'll see now our word cloud popping up with most frequent words being in the large fonts. Performance, yes. Attendance, transparency, students working together. Yes, I agree. Politics, equity marking. Yes, that's right. That's very interesting because in the last 1 year, I have been trying to understand how students actually behave in terms of engaging in group-based assessment. And I fully agree with whatever is being said here. And what I try to do is to summarize the problems and try to link that with previous literature in this regard. So the most common stuff that I have seen is in this particular slide. So what I have seen, like if you want to change it from an individual assessment to a group-based assessment, you can't just say, okay, it is now a group-based assessment, because individual assessments are suitable for individuals to run that assessment. So they are challenging for an individual to take or undertake that process. But if you want to change it to be a group-based assessment like the unit that I have been coordinating, the unit should be challenging enough. The assessment should be complex enough in a way that it will engage and stimulate students to work together. So it will warrant a group effort. And this is the main thing that we try to focus on when we adopt group-based assessments. And the assessment should be a bit authentic in terms of being a problem-solved assessment like the one Adam and Sarah were talking about, or it could be a project-based assessment. So you can personalize the experience of the students. So every single group could come up with their own project at the end of the day. And because my unit is about research proposals, so every group was given the opportunity to come up with a completely unique proposal than others. And even if you have an essay or you have a report to be done, it should be adjusted enough in order for each group to come up with a more personalized and unique outcome at the end of the day. The other thing that I have seen is that many lecturers, they want to have a peace of mind and they ask students to have their own groups formed. And the problem with that is you keep students in their comfort zones because they will select their friends. And when they select their friends, it will be difficult for us to assess their individual performance at the later stage because they will favor their students, their friends, and give them a high ranking when you come up with a situation that you want to evaluate each individual and see to what extent they have actually contributed to the entire work. And collusion, contract cheating, and many other forms of academic misconduct may come into play because students who know each other, they are more vulnerable to be involved and engaged in such unacceptable practices. One more thing is the team miscommunication, as you correctly mentioned in the word cloud. Yes, there are issues with team miscommunications, and that's why we want students to learn the better practices to be good communicators. One of the great attributes that we are all striving to achieve is how to make our students better communicators. So unless you put them in the context of communicating orally or in writing, they will not be up to it. They will not be employable at the end of the day. So group-based assessments will open many opportunities for students to polish their soft skills in terms of teamwork, in terms of conflict management, as well as communication. And I have seen it like when you get a group of students who are not diverse enough in terms of GPA, in terms of backgrounds, gender diversity, or whatever factors that you may need to consider, you will find out that those who are introverts in nature or those who are low achievers, they will not engage enough. They will be singled out. They will not be part of the team. You will see like 3 out of 4 be engaging in the group effort, but the 4th one will not be included in the discussions. So that was one of the issues that I have also spotted during my experience as well as the literature. And it is also difficult to assess each member. How would we assess them unless we have proper terminology? So if you are saying, yes, we want to go for peer evaluation, we have tools and technologies, unless you do that systematically by in the first place, you ask students to form their groups based on your own selection as a teacher, you will end up getting false ranking and grades for the peer assessment. So there is a missed opportunity by not implementing a systematic approach to group-based assessment. And I teach project management, so my students need soft skills more than any other discipline, because all projects will require a lot of leadership traits, communication, and conflict management tools. So we are missing the opportunity of equipping students before they graduate with the tools and skills that are needed to be more employable. So what I have done, when I got the direction that we need to change from an individual assessment to group-based assessment. So the first assessment was a critical report that students had to do individually. And then—
That's 10 minutes, Samer, 10 minutes
Yep.
already.
Yes, that's right. So the second one was a research proposal that students have to do. And it was individual, then I had to do that in a group setting. So the first thing was to change the assessment to be a progressive assessment. Today in the first session, they were talking about asking students to do consequential assessments. So you can actually pick those who are contract cheating or they are not engaging enough. So the proposal was split into 3 phases. One is outline proposal, draft proposal, and then final proposal. And the students have to consider all feedback given to them by the tutor or other colleagues in their subsequent submissions. And the submission was made intentionally bigger and more complex in terms of the tasks that students have to do during the term. And the teacher had to do the group forming. It was not fully random. The teacher had to consider the GPA as a main criterion. The gender was also considered. For example, a girl was not actually put in a group with males alone. So we had this feedback coming from one of our students saying, I was singled out because I'm the only girl in the group. So you need to consider other factors like gender, diversity, because some students from one country may speak in their own language. So you need to be diverse in your selection. So this is what we did as well. You ask students to negotiate a group charter. So a group charter where students can agree on their rules, how they want this group to run out and operate. What penalties would be there for those who are not functioning or not doing enough job. And we provide them with handouts, and you can Google it. There is plenty of templates available online. And I embed an oral assessment tool. So I had 2 aspects. One is oral presentation, where each group is presenting their work to others, while I also addressed oral examinations. So every student was aware that they will come to a stage that they will be asked questions and they will be asked about the merits of their research proposals. And
12 minutes.
And the mere finding, the mere fact that they have this particular oral examination as part of the assessment has helped a lot in engaging students and making them attaining the learning outcomes at the end. And then I included self and peer assessment, and you can just do that as a survey question where you give them quantitative and one qualitative question, asking them about their leadership, about their communication channels, how did they perform, what do they think about other peers in terms of leadership contribution and genuine aspects. And you promote team management tools. So I give them something called Asana. It is like team management and project management tool available online. Every student can sign up for free. And all of that has actually helped to achieve the graduate attributes. And this is the result that I got in the last 2 terms. So students were pretty fascinated with the group assessment. And one said the best aspect is that I have never seen the pattern of assignments like this. It was something beyond my imagination. It means that the way of doing assignments was easy, not too hard. And others have spoken about the team management and how they have learned many soft skill aspects. So before I finish, so I have one last slide to go. So these are the challenges that I have faced. So there was an issue with the commitment of casual staff. You ask them to do things, but unless you stimulate them and engage them in a way or another that they have the extra mile and put extra effort, you will have some difficulty in achieving what you are aiming for.
1 minute to go, Samer.
Yes. So just back to your phones, please. This is in a nutshell what I have been doing. So could you go back to your phone and give me your opinion about these features, the proposed features? What do you think about each one? Whether you will be considering any of them or not at all? Just for me to build open and see how can we improve later on. If you can go to your phone again, and this is the code again, menti.com 24 33 and 0. And I'm done with my presentation. So
Thanks, Samer. While we're waiting for people to complete the little evaluation at the end, does anybody have any questions for Samer? You can either raise your hand or type the question into the group chat. While people are doing that, Samer, one of the questions that came up for me was the project itself, the group task itself. Can you give us an example of what the actual group task was?
yeah, okay, so what I will do, I can you see this?
But quickly, Samer.
Just quickly, yeah. It was a research proposal. Students have to do that research proposal over 4 stages, 4 parts. Can you see that? Can you see what I'm, okay.
Yes, yes.
So the first one is 10% of the 80% of the mark, because the first assessment was individual and we kept it individual to measure the learning outcomes for individuals as well. And the group assessment, we split that into 4 assessments. One is outline proposal and group presentations, and they do that in tutorial classes, and that was during week 8. And there is 20% for draft research proposal and oral examinations. So if you have large classes, you may do that randomly and say just 50% of the groups will be examined by the tutor, and you can also do that during tutorial classes. But you ask students to prepare the draft research proposal in full, and then they have to take all the feedback into consideration and submit the final research proposal. So the rubric has to consider whether or not they have incorporated all the feedback that they got. And there is also 10%, or you can play with that weighting anyway. You can ask them to have peer evaluation, self and peer assessment. You can use SurveyMonkey, you can use your own tools. At CQ, we have something called a group SPA, which runs really well with Moodle site that we use. And this is the way how we do it. And we ask students even to consider Asana for their practice. And we give them a lot of details with regard to how they will form their groups, how they will run the group charters, and the rubric has to consider all these aspects. So when it comes to project management of
thanks, Samer. I'll stop you there. I know that you could keep talking underwater,
yes.
And I appreciate that. Just one more question. How did the students perform overall? That's just a question that's been asked.
Okay, all groups have passed. We got only one group in the first term that has not actually done the work, and it was actually because of their individual capabilities. They were not engaged enough, but all other groups have done a good job. In term 2, we had some issues with the teaching staff. There was lack of resources, so students didn't perform as we actually intended. We got some academic misconduct cases because in some campuses, students were allowed to form their own groups, which has actually deteriorated the entire intention of what we wanted to achieve. But overall, the overall satisfaction was 4.6 out of 5, which was quite pleasing to see from our students.
All right, thank you very much, Samer. We might just hold any further questions there. If we've got time, we'll come back at the end of the session. So can I ask everybody to please show your appreciation and thanks to Samer for his presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All right, we will jump straight into the next presenter, feedback for Feedforward, managing the process of becoming in will contexts.
Thank you. Okay, so my presentation takes a little bit of a different view towards assessment. Rather than a focus on assessment of learning, I'm actually interested in assessment as learning and the way that feedback processes fit into that view of assessment, particularly in work integrated learning contexts. So from all of the research that's out there around approaches to assessment, there's actually very little that monitors how feedback processes are used in work integrated learning contexts. And ultimately, they have become partners in the learning and the assessment and the preparation of our graduates for professional work. So assessment occurs both in those settings and within our institutions. So that really interested me, and basically is the basis for this little research project that I've set up. So the research question there that is guiding the way that I was looking at feedback processes actually is a response to the fact that there's very little information out there about how feedback is used to support the effective performance of students in their WIL placements. So I hope to address some of those gaps by finding answers to those questions. But the two terms in red actually need a little bit of definition so that you can see how they're being approached in this project. So graduate employability is understood in a whole range of ways. At its simplest level, it's basically just percentages, if you like, measured by the graduate outcome survey that might say this percentage of graduates receive jobs in their professions of choice following graduation. Those sort of figures are affected by a whole range of contexts, economic contexts, the demands for a particular profession at a given time, government policies, and even what graduates want to do with their degrees once they've finished. So apart from those factors that are often beyond the control of individual graduates, there's actually an underlying expectation that graduate employability equates to career readiness. So our graduates should have the occupation-specific knowledge and skills for entering the professional workplace and being able to perform the associated tasks immediately on their employment in chosen professions. Finally, the literature's really clear that graduate employability is measured by far more than just the acquisition of a body of occupational specific skills that are going to last you for the duration of your career. So in knowledge economies, employers are actually seeking graduates who've got skills for working with knowledge, for responding to complex problems, for demonstrating autonomy. All of those things are what I'm talking about in terms of the process of becoming a professional through the experiences in the workplace. Feedback is also understood in a range of ways. Now, while it's claimed to be one of the most powerful influences on learning, this claim actually depends on the way people think about and enact feedback processes. So one common understanding is, like in the old days, we'd have the pile of marked assignments sitting on the bench for collection and say, I gave all this feedback and students didn't bother to come and collect it. So, although we've moved on to electronic return of assessment tasks, that focus on feedback really looks at the way an educator might give feedback to students or information that is hopefully going to be used by them, but there's actually no way of judging the effect of that feedback on student learning, mainly because it's generally attached or occurs as part of a summative assessment process. The definitions that I've got here challenge that conception of feedback. They actually turn the whole notion around to include not how feedback is given, but to focus on how it's received or used by students. So you can see that regardless of which research framework you actually take, questions like where to next, the idea of being able to self-regulate your own performance and input what you've learned into future tasks, and the idea of enhancing the quality of their work actually changes the focus of the way I'm looking at feedback through this project. So a little bit of a review of the literature actually shows, or these are some of the concerns, and there's lots of concerns. So this is just a summary of some of the key ones that are raised in the literature around this current sort of feedback processes that we use that actually have the potential for limiting the sorts of qualities that we're looking for in terms of graduate employability. The first point, that feedback is mainly monological. So that's just that idea of being passed from me to you, from us to the students, without any information about how to act on it, without providing an opportunity for students to construct meaning of the message, to discuss it with others, to check that they actually understand or can connect the feedback message to their own prior knowledge. That point also makes timing very important, because it's often, or this sort of feedback is actually given at the end of a learning period through summative assessment, and therefore gives little opportunity for students to use the information to improve their next submission or their next attempt at a task. And that's sort of really the process of closing that feedback loop. So the problem is that monologic sorts of feedback don't help students develop the sort of self-regulation that underpins quality performance or the development of those thinking skills we associate with graduate employability. The second point there actually shows that out of those questions or those definitions that I pointed out to you, the bit that's often missing when feedback is diagnostic is it might focus on strengths, it might focus on deficits, if you like, in the submission, but doesn't improve or include information or guidance about where to next. So that question that's intricately related to feed forward, what am I going to do? How can I improve on this, is missing from that diagnostic approach to feedback. So critiques of that actually aim or focus on the fact that we're guided by achievement rather than learning when we give that sort of feedback. And it makes it very difficult for students to be able to apply their knowledge and skills and transfer them to new contexts. The next 2 points are very closely related, and I heard sort of bits of this actually come out with Adam and Sarah's presentation as well, where, you know, it's a bit pretty much you don't know what you don't know. Ultimately, those students who find it the most difficult to evaluate the quality of their own performance are those who perform poorly, and that's basically because the skills for completing the task are very often the self-same knowledge and skills that you use to be able to evaluate the quality of that task. So ultimately, our assumptions that students will understand the feedback we give them can be faulty, and if they don't understand it, they have no way to be able to act on the information. Finally, we have to be aware that feedback is an emotional business. And when students actually perceive that the feedback is targeting them, or is in any way related to being unfair, if it's rather than directing, improving their performance, if it comes without guidance about how to move forward, they'll actually lose motivation and are less likely to use the information. So with
That's 10 minutes, Kerry, already.
Okay, thanks, Celeste. With those findings in mind, I basically created a little framework that I was going to use to help me look at what sort of feedback processes are students experiencing out in these will contexts, because they're so important in developing these sorts of thinking processes. So you can see there that basically the challenges that I've highlighted in that previous review are addressed through this set of characteristics of what feed-forward approaches to feedback need to look like, and the conditions and the climate or environments that are necessary for enacting that sort of process. You'll notice that the characteristics there, apart from addressing the challenges that were identified, aim to actively involve learners in feedback processes themselves, so that they become participants in a dialogic process that actually builds their self-regulation, their confidence, and their understanding of ways to improve their practice. The characteristics can't be evidenced if these conditions in the middle of the framework are not put in place for achieving them. So firstly, students need to build tacit understandings of what quality looks like to be able to understand the feedback they received. So those sorts of understandings should be based on standards that describe the complexity of professional work, and they have to be delivered using modes that support students' understanding of the message. There's
That's
got
12
to be opportunities for students to be able to put that feedback into action through further related tasks. And finally, so ultimately that focuses on the importance of formative assessment, not just feedback that occurs on summative assessment. And finally, in terms of the climate for providing feedback, it's got to be a supportive learning environment that supports students' motivation, their growth, by building their expectations that they will improve, that they will learn through further attempts at professional tasks. I applied that framework to an analysis of, and this is just initial, in terms of the completion of 50 students who responded to a series of questions that sought answers to those characteristics, conditions and climate in their most recent will placement. The results are pretty astounding. When you actually look at it, only 20%, and admittedly this is only a group of 50 students at this stage, but only 20% of the students described the feedback they received while they were on their will placements as useful. Some of them reported receiving no formative feedback. The only feedback came in the form of a final report that simply identified whether they were competent or not, and therefore passed the placement or not. The 96% is perhaps cause for concern around what the focus for feedback is. So that idea of feed forward, where to next.
1 minute to go, Kerry.
That the connection has to be made between the immediate task and perhaps a more important aspect of knowledge or skill or professional work. And the majority of students did not experience any of that feed forward. So those results really are quite startling, and to me identify the importance of building the knowledge and the capacity of will supervisors to provide effective feedback. Thanks, I'll end there.
Thanks, Kerry. That's actually quite fascinating. I will open it to questions. So there's a question that's just been posted to the chat. Sadler also states that academic sessional staff require training to give feedback. how might we train our academics to change from providing correctional feedback to more useful feedback?
Yeah, and honestly, Celeste, that is all part of that, and it does come down to managing feedback appropriately. So the idea of being dialogic is that the feedback should not only come from the lecturer or the educator, that participating in the feedback processes through self-evaluation, peer evaluation, enhance or enlarge the opportunities for receiving valued feedback while students are on their learning journey, rather than leaving it as an endpoint where that information can't be used. Building capacities for knowing, so Hattie and Timpley have a framework of 4 types or modes of feedback, and which are the most successful. So those that are directed towards the student or towards the task itself are the least effective, and those that are the most effective actually look at the process, the learning process underpinning the approach to assessment, or the self-regulation or metacognition of knowing how you're going. So those, perhaps building people's understanding of what those types of feedback look like and sound like, and where they can occur throughout the learning process, are very, very useful. And I believe that building sessional staff members, but also building students' understanding and the valuing of feedback is really important. So I think it's a valuing thing that we've actually got to cultivate.
Thanks, Kerry. Just in terms of work integrated learning, how many assessment items do the students undertake? So is there scaffolded assessment where we would normally, like for I know for my own units, if I've got an undergraduate class, they do their assessment 1 and then you give them feedback what they can do to their assessment 2. Is that the same process in work integrated learning?
Not really, Celeste. So in terms of education, it's a highly regulated environment around work integrated learning. So the actual responsibility for the assessment lies with the workplace supervisor in terms of the placement, and simply involves, there's an interim report and then a final report based on aspects of the professional standards for teachers that students are meeting along the way. So their ability to support students to see the whole will placement as a learning process, and their learning along the way, is part of the importance of this. And it actually came because I look at the reports that students get back, and rarely do they give anything or set goals for students to work towards to build that sort of independent capacity. So in lots of instances, the actual ability to, or the students are dependent, become dependent on us, or become dependent on their workplace supervisors for feedback rather than being able to evaluate their own performance. So this is sort of separate from, obviously they have to pass the placement to pass the unit that it's embedded in, but the whole assessment process actually occurs outside of the university.
All right, thanks, Kerry. Now, I did notice that there was one person had raised their hand before, but it may have been for Samer's presentation. I don't know if that person's hand is still up. I just can't see it anymore. Thank you, Kerry. But before, we've got a few minutes left, but before we move on, can I just ask everybody to show their appreciation to Kerry for her presentation?
Thank you.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions in general for any of our presenters in this session? Please speak now. And while you're thinking of potential questions, you can either raise your hand or you can post into the chat. Can I also ask people to complete the evaluation for this session I've just been given a message actually that the evaluation, if you've already completed it for a previous session, it's the same evaluation form and you can't get into it to do it twice. So I'm trying to work out how I can open that so you can have multiple answers. So I'm working on that. But if you haven't already completed the survey, can you please click on the link and do so for me? And I haven't got any other questions. Anyone at all?
I can ask a question.
Yes.
I don't know if you can see me. I was putting
Hello,
up
yes.
Hello.
No, I can't. I've only got a very small Brady Bunch, so I can't see all of you waving at me.
Yeah. Well, I'm Tobias. I've just got a question for Samer. I was thinking, listening to the presentation about group work and so forth, if you've noticed a difference in terms of, because for me, both when I was teaching and also working in consultancy, the importance of connecting to real scenarios. So if you've ever seen like a difference in terms of when you get students in groups and you just get them to do something, as opposed to be really clear about that this is actually a scenario that is got real links to what their future work situation may look like, and if that's been helpful or been any different, because I didn't see that in some of the lists that you had around where there was problems or what to do and so forth, and I thought that's probably something that can be quite useful in terms of how we frame the reason for the group work, that it's actually to prepare them for a situation that is real, and then how we can make those connections. So yeah, I don't know if that's something you've thought about.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tobias. I have mentioned that in order for the group assessment to work, it should be problem-based assessment or a project-based assessment. In my unit, the nature of the unit would require it to be a project-based assessment where they do a research proposal. And that research proposal is within their domain, within their discipline. They have to look at an industrial problem and they need to find research questions to address that problem. And that should be a journey of collaboration between students. The main worry that I had is the stimulation of students, most of which are international students with competing backgrounds, competing priorities, sorry. And that was a main concern for us. How can we engage them in a way or another by giving them something that could be engaging, stimulating, and interesting? So we give them topics. We told them specifically, these are the topics that you may need to look at, industrial problems. And as a group, you need to find solutions. And to find solutions, you need to do that systematically by preparing the research proposal. Later on, you can execute that proposal. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. Anyone else? So yeah, if there are people waving madly in the background, I can only see about 5 of you on the Brady Bunch. So you can open your mic and speak.
I got a question for Kerry. With regard to your framework, have you considered the efforts that should be taken in order for you to give timely feedback to students while they are within the journey rather than at the end of their journey by, you know, waiting for the summative assessment to be done and then you mark it? Because if you do that during the term, it needs more resources. Did you think about that?
Most certainly, but in terms of developing the independence and the self-regulation to be able to evaluate the quality of your own performance, you actually have to be able to participate in that process. It does certainly require more resources when it's actually put into the higher ed context. So one approach actually uses nested tasks, if you like, where the knowledge or understanding that might be demonstrated in assessment task 1 is revisited and applied, perhaps in a different way, in a follow-up assessment task. So that can be fairly simple process, I suppose, if you used a knowledge-based quiz that actually gave students almost instant feedback online about what they knew or didn't know in relation to the topic, what they needed to brush up on, and then applied it to some sort of a scenario. It certainly does take additional resources, but I would imagine that even in the assignment that you showed us and explained how you had components of the task worth different percentages to link together for an entire research project, that would be an example of a nested task that allowed students to actually use the feedback from the first 10% or task 2A as input into task 2B, so that they actually built their competence over time and applied or were able to use that feedback in meaningful ways. Yeah. So I hope that's answered the question. Yeah.
Thanks, Kerry. All right, well, thank you everybody for your participation in this session, and